Welcome to the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and share their inspiring stories. Now, let's get started with the show.
Matthew Connor here, host of the Cyber Business Podcast. Today, we're joined by Anthony Morano, Director of Information Technology and Cybersecurity at Lexio Therapeutics. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure having you, Anthony. Before we get too far in, a quick word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by cyberlinks.com. That's cyberlynx.com. Do you know if a hacker's in your system? Most companies and most people don't until it's too late and the hacker's already done damage. A hacker's job is to bypass your security, so companies need a way of knowing when someone's gotten past their security. That's where CyberLink's intrusion detection comes in. With our 24/7 security operations center, we use a combination of AI and cybersecurity technicians to see when a hacker successfully bypassed your security. So if a bad guy gets past your security, we'll know right away and be able to kick them out. Find out more at cyberlinks.com. That's cyberlynx.com. And now back to our show. Anthony, for those who aren't familiar, can you tell us about Lexio Therapeutics and your role there as Director of IT and Cybersecurity?
Sure. So Lexio is a gene therapy company that's based in New York City. We've just come from preclinical to being a clinical company as we're expanding out some of our cohorts. It's a very young company, under 6 years old, but publicly traded. We are, looking after rare diseases, which is a niche for our research. But yeah, it's a very exciting company to work for, especially in this time where, biotechnology is really pioneering the, efforts in these rare diseases.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a tough space, right? I mean, in terms of technology, the research that goes into it. Do you find it, is that kind of, I'm sure it's rather challenging to kind of keep up on it and protect it all. But being the head of IT and cybersecurity, do you find that to be a fun challenge there in the biotech field?
Yeah, so it's a very unique environment, coming from previous, Fortune 100s, coming from financial services and even labor union benefit funds and life sciences. This is the most unique because it's very lean, so both from let's say an infrastructure perspective, but also security perspective and stuff, right? I'm a team of one at Lexio. I was their first FTE hired. So I'm basically developing the department from the ground up. But yeah, it is definitely challenging on the day-to-day because you're really trying to be part of the organization and side with the business. I don't want to be a cost center. I really want to be someone that aids them in continuing their progression to get to that end result.
Well, I think that's a really interesting statement and a great way of looking at it. And the not being a cost center, but being kind of a team player. And I'd like to dive into that a little bit more because I think it's becoming a more prevalent perspective in IT and cybersecurity leadership, where it's communicating that to the rest of the organization, the rest of the leadership team, that hey, we're not just an expense anymore, but we're an integral part of the team to keep it going. Because really, what happened? What carries? What happens if the internet goes out? If people don't have computers, or if they're not safe, what good are they? We can't do anything. So, how are you going about that? Making that clear and not being a cost center.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of understanding the landscape, right? I think in an organization like Lexio, right? Because they didn't have, let's say, in-house IT, I think stuff was sort of taken for granted of always just working correctly, right? And the inner workings in the back end, we have an MSP and, we have a lot of great outside resources, but it's kind of see no evil, hear no evil, right? Just because we're not in the forefront doesn't mean that we're not doing a lot in that back end. So, in certain regards, right, the intellectual property, right, almost has a dollar value that's unknown, right, because it's totally unique. So like as we're combating, let's say, ransomware attacks, or just, exfiltration, forget about it being ransomware.
Yeah.
We're basically having to leverage, products and resources that can give us a dollar value of how much we potentially could be saving you as a result of not having these events happen, right? And I have a background in finance, which is what I studied as my undergrad and transitioned into IT. So I generally look at it always from the dollars and cents of things, because if it's not good to the bottom line, then no one is going to agree to it in the rest of the org, right?
Right.
In a lot of instances, though, you're having to make a business justification because in a lot of cases, stuff that right now that I'm bringing to the table are the equivalent of like upgrading the electric in your house, right? You're not seeing it because it's behind the walls, right? But every time you flip on your switch, you know it's going to work right. And that's a hard concept for some people to grasp, but as we also innovate with some other things that are more, like a low-hanging fruit, quick win, then people are believing the momentum of what we're doing. And I think that's a really big key to that.
I love that. And I think that's a great analogy because at the same time, if you don't upgrade your the electrical to be properly, the proper system, your house could burn down.
Right.
And so it's not just a matter of, yeah, the lights work every time. Yeah, alternatively, your house may burn down.
Right.
Right. And so I think that's a really fair analogy because the reality is I know it was a lot harder pre-COVID,
Mhm.
pre-ransomware boom,
Mhm.
to convince people that cybersecurity was important. Like,
Yeah.
we've been fine for 10 years. We've been fine this whole time. We'll roll the dice.
Yeah.
Now I don't think anybody really wants to roll the dice, but now it's a matter of what is the right level of security, right? Because
Yeah.
there's that Fort Knox security, and then is that the right stuff for us? What might be right for one organization might not be right for the next. So, and I think it comes back to your finance background. I'm assuming that you have an easier and better time than I'd say probably a lot of CIOs in communicating that financial aspect of saying, hey, look, this is why this is the right fit, and this is the cost, and this is what it could cost us if we don't. Do you find that to be helpful when you can tie it to the dollar amounts for everybody?
Yeah, especially on the right sizing, right? Because a lot of people know buzzwords and they know products that are like just floating around because they're like going to conferences, they're talking to other colleagues, right? And in a lot of cases, it's like in our company of our size, very much overkill, right? A truly large enterprise grade product is something like, yeah, it's great because you can say that you have it, but you're going to really use like 20% of it. So like, is the business value really there? So that's where like trying to really do those dollars and cents, right? And recognizing like it's not always going to be about the dollar too, right? Like
Yeah.
because if we're not turning a profit right now, it's not like I'm saying, hey, like we're adding this to the bottom line because that doesn't really exist so much, right? But we do have a responsibility to like shareholders, right? Where I'm supposed to be responsible in what I'm spending. And I take a lot of pride in that, especially here, I really am very careful on what I'm spending, in the sense of like both cutting costs by re-architecting things, but also like recognizing like, hey, we really got to spend money here, like, because this is where our vulnerability is. But the nice thing is I have a lot of support, in continuing that progression because I have brought a lot of great things to the table thus far, and we're progressing in a great trajectory to just continue that further.
Now, with your background, I think you're probably in a really great place to answer this. Do you find it to be more supportive in a publicly traded company being able to get what you need, say, on the security side of things, than in a privately held company?
Yes, 100%. So like, the interesting thing is, right, the CEO and the whole C-suite, right? Like they don't have ownership in the game, right? So you would think like, oh, like it's okay. Like we have this, bank account. We're just going to keep drawing from it. It's not really our money, right? But it's the total opposite, right? They are extremely careful, extremely vigilant, and they're looking for the strong business case as to why we're spending, those dollars and cents. On the flip side, I've worked for many privately held companies where it is a single owner or a single family, and there is a lot of penny pinching on, do we really need to spend this, right? And it's so interesting because they have so much more to lose,
Yep.
in, a potential security incident that could have been, stopped, or at least, reduce the risk of all by doing X. And instead, we're now like having to redo and adjust and like put a band-aid. And it's like, this was not what was, like we all signed up for.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's almost like it becomes a professional business decision
Yeah.
where, on that publicly traded side versus the privately held, and I'm probably, I'd say, but it is when it's a family owned business, it is kind of like asking your parent for
Right.
money, and they're
Yeah.
like, and you're trying to, and they feel like they're giving you their money
Yep.
versus it being what's in the best interest of the organization,
Right.
and then it just being a clean, calculated business decision.
Hmm.
So interesting. I like that. Well, we've touched on your background. Can you, and I love the fact that we've had on the show since we started this CIO
Hmm.
series, we've had CIOs who've come into tech in from so many different backgrounds, be it, truck driving, restaurant managers, people who started in one industry and then decided, one entirely different career path and then found IT. And I think it's really nice for people to be able to hear that, just that you don't have to be an Uber hacker, hacking into the Pentagon by 16 to be able to be successful in IT. So can you share with us your story? How did you get into IT, and how did it all begin, and what was the path you took?
Yeah, so I started studying finance. I've always been really good with numbers. I was really good with fixed income specifically, so the bond market in college. And I went to college during the whole financial meltdown of like '06 to '08. And, basically you're having to take a step back and realize that you probably will not have a job upon graduation.
Yeah.
And I was set to graduate early in 3.5 years versus 4. And I realized how bad of an idea that was at the time because, what was I going to do? But I was working full time and went to school basically full time for a labor union. I worked in the pension department doing annuity calculations, like something really simple, right? I started right after I graduated high school, and they were so flexible, they let me work straight through college, which was
Oh, cool.
great. So as I was like realizing I needed to figure out what I was going to do next, I started saying like, well, maybe I can look at doing some coding relating to these annuity calculations. So I started to look about like how do you do the actuarial factoring like on VB, right? Just straight Excel. So kind of like self-taught that, right? That kind of got wind to the IT director there at the time, and he was like, what else can you do, right? So they were a mainframe shop, an AS400 series, so RPG and control language. And basically, like I got took under his wing and learned that, So I learned the RPG coding, I learned the control language coding, and I basically stayed there post graduation and stayed there for a long time. Like I want to say 6 to 10 years total,
Wow.
where I became the IT director there. He eventually retired, and it was very a dynamic environment because most people don't get labor unions, but they're highly regulated, especially when you have the benefits fund side relating to HIPAA, and then you
Yeah.
have the pension side as well. So, like, there is a lot of data and a lot of governance around the data.
Yeah.
So, I just continued this track of basically saying, okay, like, I'm never going to go back into finance. I'm just going to stay in IT. So continue onwards, like get a master's in IT, and transition to a different labor union, a bigger one in New York City, which was the International Brotherhood of Teamsters Union in New York City, the largest local Teamsters union in the United States. And that's where I was promoted to Chief Information Officer from a director of IT. And I hit that title fairly young. I think I was 33 or 34 when I got that promotion. And it was basically, a recognition that, they wanted this outwardly facing role considering how many different agencies within the city of New York, different vendors that we were dealing with, that like this created a slightly better posture for the organization. So I sat there, it was great. I was very hands-on. I've always been very hands-on, but also, sitting on a policy level, policy making, still the governance, still the risk, right? All of that being there. And then I continued the progression forward, right? Where I went on to like life sciences, and then moved into more pharma, and then moved to where I am now, which is biotech. And what's very cool about my journey is I've kind of gone full circle in the pharma world, in the sense that I worked for Thermo Fisher at one point, which made the bases for a lot of the drugs that are used by most companies today. Pfizer's and the Merck's all purchased from Fisher Scientific and stuff,
Yep.
to now on the biotech side of actually like the development of, a gene therapy to fix a rare disease. And I've also been on the dispensing side, in a specialty pharmacy. So like there isn't much left, in that world of IT for pharma. But yeah, I did not start in IT by any means. I progressed into the role.
Well, let me ask you, because when you take that kind of, I don't want to say step down, but when you go from a large pharma to biotech, I mean it's basically like joining a startup, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's much more that startup mindset. And is it like that there, where it's kind of people, you're not really rolling the dice, but I mean, when you're doing research and you're this small organization, you are kind of gambling on that one thing to kind of pan out, and you don't have the huge unlimited funds that big pharma does,
Right.
right? And so is that the kind of on the IT side, what's that like? Is it do you find it to be this exciting, great, kind of startup kind of spirit, or
Mhm.
is it different? What's it like?
It's definitely startup, right? So, no lie, it was actually a little difficult to get used to it because I had not worked for a startup, coming from large enterprise, companies with having teams of 300, coming to here of a team of one with a company of less than 80 people. It's very different, right? Um, so the nice thing is, like, senior leadership here is come from big pharma, right? So they're all folks that are extremely smart. They bring great ideas and they have great drive for the company, which in a startup, it proves to, be very fruitful, because a lot of the people that surround me come from a biotech, right? Not everyone comes from large pharma. So you get this blend of an environment where some people are very accustomed to like a very corporate enterprise environment, specifically on IT, right? Like self-service help desk, like do we have a software catalog, like do we have to VPN, like very, normal questions I would say you would ask if you came from any sort of larger company. And then you have this whole other set where it's like, why aren't we on Google Workspace? Why aren't we on Chromebooks? Like, and it's a huge dichotomy, but it works. So like it's just very unique on getting used to, but very easy to manage once you've settled in.
That's great. It's funny because as people, tech the tech people tend to be either very much risk averse, and I
Mhm,
think there's a large kind of you know portion of the IT industry that are risk averse. They, for
mhm,
whatever reason, they like the technology, but they don't really like taking a lot of personal risk.
mhm.
So it's interesting to see. You don't often see people moving from big pharma down. Do you find that you are much more the risk taker, or is it just that it was too good of an opportunity to pass up?
So it was definitely risky, right? Like, and also taking a title demotion, right, is something very hard to get over, right? So I went from a CIO to a vice president to a director. Um, so, mentally you're having to get over that a little bit, right? And whether you're making a right decision in your career, and I'm very young in my career, but still it's like, what am I doing, right?
Mhm.
But when you realize the potential, right, of what the company's doing and then what you can do coming in here, right, you have to let the title exit your mind because, it just, this fit their needs for the time, like it's not a fault, or a
Yeah.
negative. But you basically are acting, or not acting, but you are the most senior individual as it relates to IT, right? So anyone in the company is coming to you for the advice and what's the best practice on how we're going to do X, right?
Yeah.
And folks realize as you come to the table with really cutting edge ideas of things that you've done previously, now you're like, how can we get you into every conversation, right? Like, I went from having a calendar that was not very full, like, normal, enterprise is you have a meeting back to back every hour, you'd have no break and you were never in the weeds. In the beginning here, it was very weedy and not so many meetings. Now it's a total hybrid of both. And I think that that's just a testament to their evolving of the mindset as well. But yeah, that's kind of my take.
Well, and then, with that additional risk, I'm assuming that now you're looking at, sure, I could be CIO at a larger company, and just kind of chill there,
Yeah,
or moving down to a much smaller company where
yeah,
now you're maybe getting a piece of that pie,
yeah.
and as it grows, you get to grow with it, and if it's you get to benefit from some of that success as well. Is that pretty
Yeah,
much the incentive there?
Yeah, 100%, right? Like, and it's also like it's exciting to be able to build something from the ground up, right? Like I'm taking all of the knowledge, for like the almost 20 years of working in IT and knowing what I would never do again, knowing what I loved and knowing what I liked but thought I could improve on, and I get to do it myself, right? So like that's a huge win. Like I'm almost my own boss, right?
Yep.
But
Yep.
it's just very unique.
Well, let me ask you. So, what are some of the things that have got you excited about, the projects that you're working on now, and that that you're looking to do, the things that you can talk about? What's got you excited?
So, doing a lot of the cybersecurity work here, right? Like when I first came on board, I did not have my CISM certification, and I made it a point that I would get it. Over the CISSP, more so because I wanted to make sure it wasn't so practical and that I was going to offer things that helped the business, right?
Yep.
And realizing that there could be some severe vulnerabilities here, right? Like, so building the defense in depth methodology, I brought in some amazing products that I'm still very excited about today that really are like shelling us like an onion, right? And I keep explaining this to everyone, like it is layers upon layers, right? And that still gets me excited, right? Because now I know, okay, the next step is where are we like inefficient on some things, right? So like obviously the buzz being AI, nobody wants to be left behind. But in an organization like this, it's slightly different, right? Because, and I kind of tell everyone this, like, listen, if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. Like, it's really okay. Like, you don't have to make AI work for your day to day because it's not going to fit in your day to day for everyone.
Yep.
So, like, I think, things like that, right? But then also being able to offer highly efficient engagements with like, as we're vetting new sites that might potentially be hosting a trial for us, right? Creating a dynamic engagement, where we can get real live time data like back and forth. These are things that they didn't know how to do, right? Like, because they didn't have someone here to do it.
Yeah.
So like things like that get me very excited. Like we have some pretty large initiatives as we're looking into the EU and looking into like Brazil as we're having to like deal with regulations, right? GDPR,
Yep.
and understanding how are we going to architect what we need to ensure that we're compliant. That's really exciting for me. Like I still want to get my hands into building that. I don't just want to pass that off because I want to speak on the environment because I'm going to get asked about it. So things like that, this a company like this gives me that opportunity, which is what's so exciting.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's so much more dynamic and so much more, you there's interactive really,
Yeah.
right? I mean, at that level you get to make decisions, you get to execute, you get to really enjoy it. I think personally, I think it's far more exciting and fun. And I get it, that's not for everybody. Not everybody wants to have that fun. They
Mhm.
like to have their day to day, but I'm right there with you. I think that's it's just a lot more fun. So the things that you can tell us about, like, I think the layered approach to security and being able to communicate that is really, I think it's a paramount importance. I mean, you
Mhm.
cannot let just one, you can't just have one layer of defense, because ultimately someone will find a way through it. Someone,
Yep.
it will have there will be a mistake, a vulnerability, a something. And
Mhm.
so you have to have multiple layers. So of the things that you've put in that you can tell us about, what's one of, some of the more exciting things that you've done that you're, because clearly that was a point of excitement for you. What are some of those things you can tell us about?
Yeah, so I would say the most amazing thing that I recently brought in here was this product that does real life ransomware scanning in our Office 365 environment, right? So we're a serverless environment. I just migrated a whole data share from a different third party that we had into SharePoint. So I have everything in one spot right now. Um, and the nice thing is this product is kind of like it's a hands-off approach for me in the sense that it's scanning 24/7. It can detect an anomaly that's happening in real time and basically can isolate where an instance of ransomware is happening, cut the API access so that it doesn't affect the rest of the SharePoint environment, remediate it, and then actively restore what's been ransomwared. And like that's incredible. And it's interesting because I was taking a different approach to this where I was really going to rely on the backup product, right? And there's a lot of big names in this space that, guarantee, ransomware protection, and they scan the backups, immutable storage, right? The whole nine yards. But I was like, it's too late, right? Like it's like I'm gonna have to do so much work to figure out, like how do we restore? And we're gonna have to restore to another tenant, which is gonna take forever. I'm like, I was like, I don't want to deal with this. Like, there's got to be something newer. And then I found this one and did a lot of due diligence on it. And like, I cannot promote it enough to people that I speak to because
Feel
it's
free.
just, yeah, like it's just such a great product.
Yeah. You feel free. And now's your chance. You can.
So,
Yep.
Spin AI is the name of the company. Really, like it's was been such an amazing onboarding and the interface and the dashboarding. Like it's really a great product, like, and like we're a Druva customer as well. Like I know how great Druva is. I was considering Rubrik, like the biggest names that you could think of. But I was like, can't I do it on the front end and the back end? Like why only on the back end? So, this is one thing that we developed, and I've never slept better knowing that during the day it's being checked. I'm not waiting, for the other shoe to fall, by the time the backup occurs and scans are happening. It's like, no, no, we're checking everything at all times. That's just makes me feel so great.
That's fantastic. And how is it on affordability?
It's very affordable. I mean, like when you take a look at other solutions, especially on backups, it is on par. Like, and the nice thing is the tiers are very realistic to the cost.
Yep.
So, like, for example, I don't need to have the full retention with them because I still have Druva as a retention for my backups. So that gets carved out, right? And the price goes down. Like that's what I like to see. I like the a la carte in this case a little bit more, knowing that the core functions though are super affordable, and that's really what I was going after them for.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love when we can have a kind of a product testimonial, if you will, that
Sure.
people are just, look, you love it so much that you are, cheerleading it and
Yeah.
and promoting it. And I think that's the way it should be. And so yeah, spin AI. So we'll
Yeah.
definitely link to it, and maybe we'll even have them on the show, because
Cool.
that'd be great. I love
Yeah.
it. um how about anything else, any other fun new projects that you're excited about?
So trying to think that's really exciting. So we've got some stuff going on. We had some overhauls that were done that are a little bit more exciting. What I mean by that is like, so I support a full lab, right?
Hmm.
There's obviously scientists on staff, there's lab equipment, and there are lab computers and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I needed to get a better handle on the like SSO involved to this, right? And this is a little tricky because there ends up being like CFR 11 compliance on FDA relating to like how is it audited on the computers of like who's done what when.
Yeah.
And you know, it sounds easy, like, okay, we're just going to turn on SSO and everything's going to work, right? But that's not the case, right?
Never is.
Because, we're an Intune shop, right, where policies have already been created. And the thing is though, like lab environments generally work in very isolated, like, network segments, right?
Hmm.
They don't want all the AV software, because it could just not interact well with the lab equipment. So we really had to take a step back on re-architecting a lot of these policies so that we could create a specific set of policies just for those that were still secured, but we can still turn on the SSO. And what's really exciting to me about this sounds very vanilla, right? But before, there wasn't really an easy way for, let's say, a scientist to send, let's say, the data that they were working from with that machine off to, let's say, a OneNote, right? Or to a SharePoint site
Hmm.
without them like having to like re-logging in and re-MFAing and doing all this stuff, right? And then like who was still logged on before and like did they truly log out and stuff? That's all gone now, right? So now it's full SSO. When they log in, it's their environment, right? When they go into Teams, they are talking to their other lab colleagues in their own environment specifically. That
Yeah.
was really a home run because not just from now everything is under SSO, but the governance around onboarding and offboarding of scientists, right, no longer requires us to have to go in and remove a local account, right? It's just all handled through Azure, right? Which is exactly how you want it to be. So like that's a project that will continue to evolve, especially
Nice.
as new equipment comes in, new people come in, things break all the time because it's Windows and lab equipment and they don't always jive all the time.
Yeah.
Um, so stuff like that is,
Cool.
really cool. And then other things are like forms, like super exciting, right? So like not Microsoft Forms, but we basically realized that we had a requirement or a need, I guess you could say, in the organization on tracking fillable information, but from a GXP compliant perspective. Because forms are being filled out, you need to have the full trail of like who's doing what, what's been changed, all sorts of things like that, right?
Hmm.
And we basically had to figure out a way like Microsoft Forms doesn't work for that. It's not compliant. And then there's big names, right? There's like, a DocuSign, there's like Adobe Sign, right? But they're very expensive.
Hmm.
So, and not always the most user friendly. So we implemented FormStack, which has been a great tool, very akin to JotForm, but FormStack is heavily used in the HIPAA compliant world, specifically on medical intake forms and stuff like that. And we knew that was the way to go,
Yeah.
especially because they also have CFR 11 compliance. The cool thing is that we're finding so many more uses for the product in the org. And that's like a huge win for me because as soon as we can spread this and it now becomes like part of the buffet, right, in our tech stack, it's like, oh no, we have something for this. Like we can just add you in as a user. That's a big win for me. So that's continuing to evolve as we're still building things out.
That's awesome. I love that. So you mentioned earlier about labs not wanting, you know, antivirus on there
Yeah,
because it doesn't work well with some of the equipment.
yeah.
How do you traverse that?
Testing. So we're an S1 shop, right? And I'm a heavy Sentinel-1 person. And Sentinel-1 tends to be very restrictive of all of the AVs that I've used before, including CrowdStrike, including Defender. S1 can stifle things really quickly, including stuff that's really good.
Yeah.
So when we implemented Intune and basically we're coming off of Defender, which was built into the computer, and deploying S1, it was crucial that we built out exception lists on the S1 to basically like, hey, this is all okay, and we did testing for it, right? So we would test with limited exceptions based off of the requirements from the lab software, and then continuing to add a little bit more until we got full functionality, knowing that equipment was okay. There was really not going to be another way around it because unfortunately, every computer ends up being different, and then how the device speaks to the computer is different. Not everything is like a Cat5 cable, some is a USB, some is a serial port, so when you have this, hodgepodge of interfaces, it's really a crapshoot to know if S1 is going to work and, are we going to just have to shut it all off together? But yeah, heavy testing is how you figure that out.
I love it. Well, I mean, that's good. Other than, I'm happy to hear it's not, well, you just put them in an isolated environment and then it's like, well, then how do they get to SharePoint with all the documents and everything? So you have to have, and then how do they get to the internet for other everything,
Right,
right? That they're
right.
doing. So no, I love that. That's fantastic. Okay. So I have to ask, we kind of touched on it a little earlier, with your AI. I think AI is a really, interesting one in the pharmaceutical space and
Mhm.
biotech. It's interesting to see how they're using it in, gene therapies and how they can, iterate, thousands and thousands of possibilities, very quickly and kind of speeding that up. But then on the business side, simply being able to search through everything very quickly. There's a lot of documentation that pharma and biotechs, create,
Yeah,
and being able to compare documents and see things very quickly and be like, oh, great. It saves the scientists and the analysts a lot of time and effort.
yeah.
Um, at your level now on the biotech level, how are you seeing it play out? What's kind of your approach to AI as a tool for biotech at that size?
So, we recently actually conducted a survey internally about kind of getting a understanding of like what's everyone's comfortableness with AI? Like do you understand, when you ask a question that, it's kind of out there in the public, right? Like there's no, secrecy of said question. And then understanding, did people think there was a benefit of bringing AI into their function or another function within the company, right? Interestingly enough, there wasn't a tremendous response of thinking like that AI would actually bring much benefit to
Yeah,
us. I
nice.
wasn't I wasn't surprised about that, to be honest, because we don't do a lot of stuff that is, let's say, we don't do tons of analytical stuff, right? We rely a lot on outside teams that have huge teams, right? That have large statistical software, right? That can do a lot of these, analyses for us, right? But one need that we did find was on the R&D side, specifically when the scientists discover something relating to one of their tests, right? They have this cathartic moment about some result, but they need to see, has anyone else had, or seen said, product from this case, right?
Yep.
And the question came to me is whether, we could look at some sort of scholar, AI, tool to kind of help us in doing this research because it takes tens of 20s of hours a week, to look this up. Obviously, big names come to the table, right? Like, Gemini and Copilot or Watson came to the table, right? And I was like, well, I need to see what's in the space a little bit, so let me kind of do my own investigation. So I learned that there are AI platforms specifically for this, right? And we decided on one called Site.ai, which is it's a great R&D tool. And the big thing about it, though, was the secrecy of asking the AI the question, that question does not feed into the brain of AI, right? Because we don't need everyone else to know what Lexio has discovered in their experiment to now leave breadcrumbs for someone else to figure out, well, is there something more to this, right?
Right.
So this platform, right, isolates us to our own questions, into our own R&D research that allows the scientist to start parsing out, right, specific terms, using, LLM, obviously, to, ask further developing questions. But what's very interesting about it is they can build their own dashboards of, let's say, published scientific papers and stuff like that, and then asks questions around those specific documents only versus this overall picture. Then it gets isolated down, and then they can keep going, right? And, we're in the very early stages of using it, and bringing it into the company, but it's brought a lot of excitement, right? So in cases like that, I find it to be very useful. In cases of like our normal day to day, like people weren't really feeling it, and I'm also very much okay with that.
Yeah, I think that's awesome, and I really that is really kind of key. Having that isolated environment where you can maintain, kind of confidentiality of your information. So
Yeah.
that's it's paramount. Well, Anthony, I think I could do this all day. This has been really fascinating. I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing with us. But before we go, can you tell everybody where they can find out more about you and more about Lexio?
Yeah, so you can certainly find me on LinkedIn, right? You can search my name, Anthony Morano. Lexio can be found also on LinkedIn or via our website, lexiotx.com. Yeah, I mean, like, we are very out there. It's not like the research that we're doing or the rare diseases that we're working on is secretive. So you can see all of that, and, very happy for anyone to reach out, and or research Lexio.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, Anthony, and until next time.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Cyber Business Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.